Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition podcast, sponsored by the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. I'm Brian O'Connor. I am an adjunct professor of entrepreneurship at Chicago Booth, and joining me today, I have the pleasure of sitting next to Matt Taylor of Gypsum Ridge Capital. Thanks for joining, Matt.
Yeah, no problem, Brian.
Why don't, Matt, we start with just a little bit of your background and your story. You're a search funder that has just recently gotten funded, which is an exciting time for every search funder.
About 2 weeks ago, we wrapped up the fundraise. So.
Congratulations. The listeners and viewers would love to hear a little bit about your background and sort of your decision to pursue this path.
Okay. So a little bit non-traditional. I was raised in Germany for about 15 years, parents of some government employees. Came back to the U.S. to do high school, university, and on my way to law school, got lost and found my way into the Marine Corps. Spent just under a decade in uniform, and there met an amazing partner and my best friend, who at the time we started becoming friends didn't know that we wanted to be small business owners, but over the course of a 10-year friendship, decided that that's what we had. We had this passion for leadership that we picked up in almost 20 years of combined service, leading organizations from 200 to 300 personnel. And then we got out of the military and realized that we lost that passion for leadership. It wasn't about achieving something outsized, but really just wanting to get back, reconnected with running an organization, designing strategies, managing personnel, and really kind of motivating people to achieve something big. And we wanted to become entrepreneurs. I went down a path before that of a career in finance and consulting. My partner was involved in product development and managerial operations at a tech startup. I found out about search funds while I was living in Dallas, and after I kind of did a little bit of homework on them, realized immediately this is what we wanted to do to kind of make our path forward.
Sure. What in particular was it that drew you to this path? Is it getting involved back in a leadership role?
It was. So I was actually on my way to Chicago to take a job at a small private equity fund, and was kind of lamenting to some of my peers that I wasn't excited to go work for someone else and relearn the hierarchy and relearn the process, and ultimately be in charge of fewer people now than I had been 5 years ago. They said, hey, why, if you're so displeased with this idea, do your own thing. Go look at a search fund. Had no idea what a search fund was. And at that time, just it connected with us. We're going to be risk takers, in charge, and the ability to leap about 4 stages in life to get to the place where you're really making a difference in a small business.
As an investor, and just out of general curiosity, where did the name Gypsum Ridge come from?
Yeah, it's a really special piece of earth in 29 Palms, California, which is a military base in the middle of the Mojave Desert. And there's this particularly nasty piece of terrain called Gypsum Ridge. And anytime you wanted to go or were chosen to go to Afghanistan or Iraq, you had to spend a significant amount of time climbing this incredibly awful piece of terrain. And so, not saying that Gypsum Ridge is an awful place, but it is a formative piece of terrain that you get to spend some time on and reflect on your life decisions.
Okay, so is Gypsum Ridge in some ways analogous to what you might be embarking on?
That's kind of what we thought, you know? It's like, this is a place we're going to go and we're going to sweat and we're going to get tired, but ultimately you come out of it a little bit better.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Great. How did you decide, and you talked a little bit about your partner, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the decision to pursue this path with a partner versus out on your own?
And we thought a lot about that, but ultimately I couldn't ask for a better business partner. Graham and I there's no one I trust more in this world. 10 years of training next to each other, living with each other, helping him through some of the most arduous circumstances in the world. I know that man's integrity, that man's character and work ethic are second to none. And we both know that the success to running any organization is building the right team. And so if I start with the right partner, we're halfway there. I never have to question what he's going to do. I never have to question what he's going to bring to the game. He is a key individual. And so for me, I just think that having somebody like that you can respond on or rely on really is absolutely essential. So rather than having to go out and find those talents in somebody else, I had them from day one.
Yeah, so clearly there's a history there and a mutual trust and respect that is forming the foundation of this partnership, which is fantastic. Have you thought at all about the bifurcation of roles and responsibilities and how you might think about sort of 1 + 1 being equal to more than 2?
Absolutely.
Hopefully.
So we have extremely different skills. I focus more on finance and strategy and on business development. I'm very social, outgoing, and able to kind of deal with those circumstances. Graham is much more process and procedure driven. He does operations, he does personnel management. So if we were to get into when we get into a business, that's exactly how the division is going to go. I'm going to focus on the external factors of the business. He's going to focus on the internal factors of the business, and we meet in the middle on designing the strategy.
So you've just sort of gone through this fundraising process successfully. So congratulations. Can you describe the process and some of the various interactions and the trials and tribulations of essentially raising capital on a strategy without a target in mind, and really the notion of people giving you capital to go out and chase down deal flow and conduct industry analysis? Walk us through that process.
Asking people for money when you don't have a clear idea what it's for is a definite challenge, right? Luckily, I mean, what's great about the search fund community is we're not the first ones to walk down this path. And so there's a pretty well-established list of people who are willing to not only invest, but offer some mentorship in this. And so we decided early on that building the right team was just as important in building the fund as it will be in building the business. So we spent a lot of time really figuring out what it was we needed to complement our skills. The military gave us excellent leadership abilities, excellent problem-solving abilities, but neither of us has ever been an investment banker or a deal person. So the idea that we needed a team to come around us and help us find and value the right businesses is something that we really took to heart.
So those were some of the deficiencies in both your and your partner's skill sets that you were looking to solve for by surrounding yourself with those folks.
Yeah, I think that we approach the search fund as it's not just a bunch of people throwing money our way to go find something. We're building a team of folks who all have the common objective of identifying a business and then contributing something to its success. And so for us, incorporating those skills into the investor base was a big part of the way we approach this.
What is maybe give us a little bit of just insight into the composition. What does it look like? Number of sort of units raised, number of individual investors, and sort of institutional versus individual, and how you've thought about constructing that group.
The process has evolved a lot over the time. I mean, I think we started out with a very clear idea of what our fund should look like, and through talking with potential investors and current searchers and successful searchers, that has evolved over the many months that we've been working towards this. And so we started off kind of thinking, we want to do 10 units or something. We settled on a 15-unit fund of $645,000. But we came to realize the dollar amounts and the unit size is kind of flexible. Some people will take 2 units, some people will take half a unit. Really, it's about allocation of percentage and not so much about 1 or 2 or 3 units per person. It's about making sure that you don't have an overwhelming block in one group of investors, and making sure that you're not herding 17 cats at once where you're having to manage a lot of personalities and organizations concurrently. Great.
So it sounds like you've put a lot of thought into surrounding yourself with strategic investors. How much thought was put into, you've raised a little bit of capital to fund this search, and now come acquisition time, you're going to go back to this same set of folks for presumably a much larger opportunity to invest alongside you and your partner in the business that you acquire. How much have you thought about the construct from a financial standpoint as it relates to the ability to fund the deal?
I think it's a huge part of that. I mean, I think one of the things that beat into your brain in the military is plan backwards. So we actually started at what is this going to look like at deal time, and then worked our way back into the search funding side of things. So, we talked to a lot of searchers and a lot of investors, and one of the common threads that we ran across was people saying it's tough to get everybody to the deal table for a variety of reasons, maybe different risk appetites, different hard and fast lines around what they will or won't invest in, different deal size preferences. And so it was really important for us when we talked to prospective investors that it wasn't just a money ask, it was a two-way street of what do you look for in an ultimate investment, not just in a search fund, but in a target company. And so we were really particular about building investors who had the same appetite for risk, the same ideal transaction size. I mean, not everybody's 100% aligned, but everybody's in the same ballpark, so that if one person wants a very high-end deal, wants to put in a $1.5 million equity check, and someone wants to put in $300,000, that's a tough sell to meet them in the middle. So it was really important for us to make sure that everyone was aligned around those kind of basic principles.
You got your fundraised and sort of off to the races. Before we start to talk about some of the things that you're focused on as you start your search, what do you think it was that resonated with investors about you and your partner that made them compelled to back you guys in your efforts?
Yeah, it's a crowded space, right? There's a lot of folks who are looking to raise search funds, I think more than has ever been in the market at one time. And so we tried to differentiate ourselves in a couple ways. Number one, we're a little bit older. So I'm 35, my partner's 36. I think that we're starting to see the median age of search funds, or searchers rather, creep up. But at the time, I still think we're a little older than most. And we come to this with a background, not as bankers and not as deal guys, but as two Marines who know how to lead in ambiguous circumstances. And at the end of the day, the message that resonated back and time again with people who have found businesses in search fund model is that you don't know what you're getting into until you're in it. You can do all the due diligence you want, you can do all the homework you want, but the day you step into that company, there's going to be a number of problems that no amount of homework we're ever going to prepare you for. Graham and I have done that for a decade apiece. We both had this really interesting job in the military where our job was to go and live with Afghan police or Iraqi soldiers or Kurdish rebel fighters and figure out, hey, what's your problem? What's your culture? And then figure out a way to enact those changes and make those improvements across a weird culture, a different language, in a different place. And those skill sets are really tough to build. And so having kind of honed those in a pretty specific way, we think, and I think our investors agreed, that those are transferable skills into a search fund world. We came to business school, we got good educations on running an organization in the military compared to running an organization in the civilian world. But it's just a very niche set of management under crisis and management under foreign concepts. So I think that went a long way with our investors.
Absolutely. I certainly saw and continue to see the parallels for sure, Matt. So you're right in the thick of getting your fund closed. What are the key things that you're focused on right now? Maybe not necessarily, and I know that you and your partner are spending a lot of time thinking about how do you hit the ground running from a search standpoint. We'll get to that. But the various sort of administrative activities and the herding of cats, as it's formally described, what are some of the activities that you're focused on today?
At this point, we've got all the commitments, and now it's a matter of getting all the documents and the capital in the bank, and it's actually not been as bad as everybody's made it out to be. But I think in large part because we were pretty organized going into this. I think one of the decisions we made early on was to use, we went with Ramjani at McDermott. He's a very well-known search fund attorney, and that simplifies our process because everyone has seen his documents. This is a very close-knit community, and if I were to bring in someone from the outside who's never dealt with search funds before, there's a little bit more question about what the documents say. This way, there's a standardized template, and it makes everyone feel a little bit more at ease with the process. So it shaves, red lines and revisions and everything kind of off the table, and that makes things a little bit more simple.
Great. Well, I hope that it continues to go smooth as you get the wires coming across the
hopefully
transom.
so.
So, Matt, it sounds like it's been a relatively smooth closing process for you. Any issues or roadblocks that you have encountered that maybe you didn't anticipate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we didn't anticipate a lot of this. In your mind, it's pretty straightforward. It's like, hey, we're super qualified, and we're going to go ask people for money, and they're shy, so that shouldn't be a problem. But there's a learning curve that goes along with this. I think learning your pitch and taking it from being a fundraising pitch into just a conversation like this. I think there was a point about a month into our process where we stopped having a very formal discussion about this is us and this is what we want to do and will you please give us money? And it became a two-way conversation about what do you have to bring to this as a member of this family that we're trying to build that's going to go out and find a business. And that seemed to resonate with people a lot more than a very formal investor presentation, if you will. And I don't know if that style works for everybody, but for Graham and I, it was a lot more effective, and we were surprised by that, about just being our genuine selves and having a real two-way conversation.
Sure, the best time to be raising capital is when you're not raising capital or when there's an appearance of, or a sentiment of not raising capital, so that makes a lot of sense. So great. I know that there are a number of things that you and Graham are doing to sort of set the wheels in motion and hit the ground running as you come out of the gates here post-closing. What are some of those things that you're doing right now as you manage the investment and closing process to get things sort of started on the search?
Concurrently in motion.
Yeah.
And I think too, just to add to your last point, this was a big factor with a lot of our investors. We started searching before we had our search fund closed. And so we could go into interviews and say, these are the things we're doing, these are the brokers we're talking to, these are the processes that are already in motion, and that inspired a lot of confidence in future investors. Right now, we're building a team, and that's a real big deal. And when I say team, we've got other students, we've got interns, both graduate and undergraduate. We're in the process of some that we've already hired, bringing them on board and getting them formalized in our processes. Others we're interviewing and bringing on some more junior folks, some college kids on their summer break to kind of be a part of our team. That's one step. we've spending a lot of time formalizing our processes. So again, the military called a battle rhythm. What are we going to do every single day? You're going to wake up and this is going to be from 7:30 to 8:30. This is going to be from 9 to 10. And not in a very rigid fashion, but at least guide poles that you can touch and say, this is my measure of success for the morning. So making sure that we're not waking up once we start taking investors' money and the clock is running and trying to figure out how this goes. It's about really creating a sense of order and discipline around what we do on a daily basis. And that is making sure that we're not wasting time with administrative tasks once we're drawing capital. We're not having to deal with communications procedures or where are we going to make cell phone calls from, or have we already talked and introduced ourselves to the right brokers and investment bankers. All that can be done now. I don't need to take somebody's check and start counting down or drawing down our capital to make phone calls to investment bankers, introduce our fund, and introduce our employees. The more we can get done before the clock starts ticking, the more runway we have once that capital is underway.
Yeah, it's a smart way to think about it. You talked a little bit about how you and Graham will delineate roles post-acquisition. Have you thought about that same dynamic during the search? Will it be delineated by industry or by geography, or how have you thought about that?
So one of the things that's really unique to our search fund is that we're in 2 different locations. And this was actually quite polarizing during the capital raise. Some investors really loved this fact and some really hated it. But he's in Los Angeles and I'm here in Chicago. And what we're doing is building nearly identical teams in each location. We're geographically separated because after a decade of working between San Diego and Afghanistan or Los Angeles and Baghdad, we've got the distance relationship down pat. And this allows us to be in 2 different places, leverage 2 different professional and personal networks, travel for less cost and less time, and really just double our footprint as we look for businesses all over the country. We're geographically agnostic, but this lets Graham kind of cover the western half of the country and me kind of go from Chicago east and cover down on more of the search. The way we're structured is with he and I kind of outlining the theories and the strategies of where we're going to look, what industries, what kind of sectors of the economy we find interesting. And then we kind of turn to some of our graduate level interns, and we have some intern pluses who are full-time engaged on our search, and have them work on the tactical applications of which businesses are we going to pursue in this sector and which brokers are we going to talk to today, while Graham and I then actually conduct the outreach based on the data gathered by our team.
Sure.
We think it's really important to have a personal connection with everyone we're talking to, brokers and sellers.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The whole idea of conducting the search from disparate locations, how have you thought about relocating to any location potentially nationwide post sort of acquisition? Is that something that you and your partner have discussed?
Yeah, we are completely agnostic to where the business is. Obviously, we'd love it to be in a great emerging, young, vibrant city, but where the business is where we'll go. And involving his wife in that conversation was a big part of starting up the fund. And this is just feedback we've gotten from other searchers and investors is we heard that this could be a roadblock for some folks, is maybe they don't want to move to a specific part of the country. Well, to maximize our chances of finding a business, we have to be totally open. And so involving his wife and making sure that all 3 of us were okay going to wherever the deal was best was a big part of setting up the fund.
Yeah, if you could choose in an ideal world, where would that be, Matt?
Oh, we spent a lot of time in San Diego together while we were in uniform, and I have a strong taco affinity, so I would happily go back to Southern California. But I will say I've been in Chicago about 4 months now, and the city is really pretty hospitable. So.
Yeah, well, we got lucky and found a business right in our backyard. We were searching on the north side and found a business in the West Loop. So sometimes better be lucky than good.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Very good. Last question on sort of the sourcing and how you're thinking about hitting the ground running. Do you envision sort of going down more of a proprietary sort of industry thesis-driven search, or leveraging some intermediaries and bankers and brokers in your process?
Sure. I think when we started this process, it was, hey, we're smart guys and we're charismatic. We're going to go out and find a business on our own. This is going to be entirely proprietary, and we're going to spend 5 or 10% of our time on the brokered search. And that we think we're smart guys, and that's not a bad strategy. But over the course of talking to, again, investors and searchers who failed and searchers who succeeded, we've come to find out that about half of the search fund deals that close are through brokered transactions. So you may pay a little bit more, but you have a willing and qualified seller, and you're not going to waste a bunch of time chasing dry holes, rather. So we fully envision it being about 50-50 at this point. And actually, I'm spending a bit more time on the brokered search, talking to bankers and brokers, and Graham's a bit more on the proprietary side. And that's something that evolved through our capital raise, because we're being told that's what works, and we're we don't know everything, but we know what we don't know. And if we can listen to guys who've done this successfully in the past, that's absolutely the way to get ahead.
Sure. How are those relationships going with, how are those conversations going with bankers and brokers and folks that might have access to deal flow when talking to a search fund group that has not yet even sort of called the search capital? How are you finding the receptiveness and responsiveness from those sources of deal flow?
I think there's 3 groups that we're talking to, and everybody you talk to, you put them into one of these buckets. One is someone who's heard of search funds before and likes the concept and is eager to work with them. And I have a list of those that I've accumulated through other searchers that I've talked to, and I'm still getting emails and warm intros made to positive bankers and brokers from other searchers who've either closed or still in the process, and that's been a really good source of our time, and the use of our time, rather. We have other folks who are educating them on the model, and it's kind of we're not sure how this is, and I think you probably have to put a visit or 2 in there, a couple more calls to make them really confident about how your model works. And there's others who I think it's, search funds are small potatoes and don't want to get involved. And so at this point, I'm not trying to change minds. So we're going to focus on those first 2 groups, the folks who know and have used search funds in the past and are happy with the concept, and educating some of those new entrants to the market. But if someone gives a really clear bias that they're against the concept, I don't want to then continue to follow up with them and then be their call of last resort, or get the deal from them that they've shopped to 15 other people and everybody said no. So, but there is a wide range of perceptions out there.
Yeah, well, Matt, it sounds like you're a step ahead of the game, and you're in a position to hit the ground running. So congrats to you.
Thanks.
And your fundraising success. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure.
A lot of fun.
And thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition podcast, brought to you by the Polsky Center at Chicago Booth.